Hey there, my name's Mallory Cooper, and I want to talk to you about all sorts of interesting issues and crazy shit. But I'm going to pull a fox with Serenity, and instead of starting at the beginning, I'm just going to jump into like episode 4, and later on we'll give you the origin story.
You know, coming up with what to record for your first video is really freaking difficult, actually. But I think what's important to note is that I'm doing it, right? Like I'm coming out there and I'm going to speak my mind and I'm going to tell people what I think and I'm going to make some mistakes. I'm going to get some stuff wrong. I'll admit it when I do. Um, because I believe that, we're all works in progress. I'm not done yet. I have a long way to go. But I feel like I'm far enough along now that I might actually have like a little bit of something to tell people. And I've done a lot of things in my life. I've been a software developer, network architect. I'm a New York Times best-selling author. I've created a science fiction universe called Aeon 14, where I write as under MD Cooper. Um, I'm kind of lucky I chose a pen name like that because when I transitioned, I was able to make it so that MD Cooper is still me, um, just by picking first and middle name that still match up to that. Um, and I'm also a public speaker, and most of the time I do public speaking about authorial things, how to do Facebook marketing as an author, how to improve your productivity as an author, world building, science, and science fiction, stuff like that. But I'm also pretty passionate about, you know, sort of a lot of social issues. And I've been like on every part of the spectrum. I was like a serious liberal, then I was a conservative, then I was a libertarian, then I was a centrist, and I was a Republican. Like I'm like freaking ping pong. Um, and part of it is because I kept searching for truth. Like I kept getting into each one of these camps and discovering that at a certain point the rhetoric just overwhelmed any logic and truth. And the people that you would hear the most from that were speaking the loudest were oftentimes the most distasteful on either side of the argument. And I just couldn't stick around. And at the same time, I was struggling a lot with religion and how it didn't really work for me anymore. And, and that took a long time to deprogram myself from. I was, born again Christian. I said the sinner's prayer in my grandmother's kitchen when I was 5 years old, which would make that like 1982. And so much of my life from then on became this struggle between who I knew I was, which was a woman, and who I was supposed to be. And there were times you know, when I reflected back and I talked to the family members, I thought about the things that I said and did, and even the things I wrote in journals. I knew I wanted to be a woman, like very clearly. And later on, I repressed it so much that I had forgotten those things. Um, and I programmed myself to believe that it was sinful and wrong to want to be the way I was. And it took me a long time to deprogram that for myself. And actually, I believe now that the Bible doesn't explicitly say anything about being trans. And it even says very little about being gay. It says nothing about being a lesbian. So I'm okay there. Um, but like it quite literally took me from when I was 10, when I really became conscious of all these things, till now when I'm 31 years later, to deprogram myself from all of this. And there's a lot to unpack in that journey. In this video, I kind of want to talk about how labels actually saved me. And this is sort of peculiar and unexpected. So I actually don't have a problem with labels. A lot of people get upset with labels because, they're new things and people don't want to have to learn new things. But we use labels for everything. Everything. Like colors are all labels. We have different labels for different kinds of wood, for different kinds of food, for different kinds of clothes. Everything has a label. If you had to like describe everything in your life without labels, it would be exhausting. Like how do you describe the color blue without the word blue, which is a label, you know? Um, or how do you canned pea soup, like that's a label. That one's a little bit cumbersome, but it tells you exactly what it is. Um, and and labels are important and they're useful. The label for LGBT people used to be just dead. So I mean, we had labels then too. That was sort of a bad joke, but it's not an incorrect one. And before that, it was a-okay. Times in human history, no one had an issue with you being gay or trans or anything like that. In fact, there's places that have always accepted trans people straight on through. Um, and where was I going with all this? So you have labels and they're useful, but when it comes to like the LGBT community, um, the labels don't seem to be accepted as much. We're like, oh, we have to learn a new thing. It's a different thing. This is a terrible thing. Why do I have to learn this new thing? And and we buck, we fight back, we balk at it. And these labels, I did the same thing at one point. I didn't like these labels. I didn't want to have to learn them. I was like, why do they keep adding more letters? I know some people like Blair White joke that they might as well just add all the letters in the alphabet at this point, which isn't a particularly helpful thing to say, but it's kind of par for the course for Blair White. I have a complicated viewing relationship with Blair White. I respect the fact that she's trans and she's out there and she speaks about trans issues. I don't like the way that she denigrates people as sort of a default way to talk about people she doesn't like, and that's something you see um, both sides. You see the left and the right do that. You see people who can't form clear arguments about other people, instead just denigrate them. They just say bad things about them, and she sometimes denigrates people who don't pass as well as she does, and then she denies them the early transition methods that would let them pass as well as she does. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, complicated relationship with her. Although she said some things I agree with tremendously, and I love her live stream with Jessica Yaniv, because that was just as painful as it was to like watch that. It was still like necessary, and I really like the way she summed things up and her, stood up to her. Sorry, I'm not entirely sure I believe that Jessica Yaniv is trans, but I have to by default reuse the pronouns that she wishes me to use. So that's sort of a common human decency sort of thing, like even if I think a trans person is terrible and or possibly lying, I want people to take me at my word, so I have to take other people at their word. Um, Even though Jessica Yaniv has done things that I don't think any other trans person would ever do. Um, but that's neither here nor there. Um, so back at the beginning of this year, at the beginning of 2019, I started to sort of like experiment with being a lot more queer than than I normally would have been. And part of that was due to the fact that I had been wearing things like leggings out in public for a long time, and I started to like play around with more fashion, trying to figure out more fashion that I could kind of look kind of like just a really queer dude, and see if that could sort of satisfy my need to present differently in society. And privately, I've been, wearing women's clothing, and I love cat suits, for example. So I'm actually wearing a cat suit right now. You can't see it because I'm laying down, but I'm reclining because I'm a woman of leisure. But but yeah, so I started experimenting with a lot of that stuff, and being queer, and I fell in with some other writers in the New England area, many of which who were also queer, in variety of ways. And I use queer in like the sort of generic. They dressed queer. Some of them were clearly on the LGBT spectrum. Some of them were just asexual people, which puts you on the LGBT spectrum. But in many cases, you're almost like not LGBT at all. I find that one interesting. I think it's great. I think it's awesome these people exist and they've identified and they can now find each other and form relationships that work for them. Just kind of like in many respects, the T is different than many of the things on the LGBT spectrum, because the other letters are mostly about your sexuality, and for us, it's about gender identity. You can be trans and also a lesbian, which is what I am. So many people think that when you become trans, it means you're into guys. It's like, well, not all girls are into guys. Lots of girls are into girls, myself being one of them. So, so I started falling into this crowd, and I was sitting with this one of the um, they're non-binary, and I was sitting with them at a table, and this is actually before I knew they were non-binary. So when I think back to that particular event, I think of it as a gendered pronoun, but they said there's another one, a gay man that was sitting with the table, and she's like, isn't it great to be at the queer table? And I just thought like, I'm like in this group that I didn't even really kind of know I could be in, but just by sort of like showing up and kind of like saying, waving my queer flag a little bit, they're like, oh, you're one of us, you belong, you're accepted. And up until that moment, the way that I dressed, the way that I presented in public, I assumed just ostracized me all the time. I assumed that in no way would would I ever find a group to be a member of, in part because of how I presented in public. And what I found was that there was this group that like not only like identified me by this, but accepted me by it, and I could be part of this group. And that's why I started like talking about like thinking about what I might actually be, because I knew that I didn't fit the cis male package that I'd been trying to cram myself into for my entire life. I, I've been struggling against my entire life in so many different ways, and and so I realized that there were things to explore. There were other options, and they actually had some boundaries and whatnot. And see, the neat thing about this was that some people say, "Well, just be who you are," but I didn't know who the hell I was because I'd spent so long masquerading as something else and trying to be something else that I never properly evolved into what I should have been just on my own. So then, what I realized is that there's sort of these, and they're not boxes per se, but they have some boundaries. Like if you exhibit these particular traits, you're probably this thing, or you have a lot in common with people who identify as being this thing. And so I tried out the whole gender fluid, gender queer thing because I knew I liked presenting as female a lot, and that seemed to fit with gender fluid. I didn't know if I was like prepared to abandon all maleness. Um, so I tried that and I played around with it and I experimented with it. Um, and it kind of felt right. Like I liked presenting as female. It felt good. It felt better. Um, and I'd always felt the parts of my body were wrong. Like I didn't like them. I didn't like my hips. I didn't like my genitals. Um, I had less dysmorphia around my chest than most people do. Was never really didn't like my face because my face didn't look masculine like I knew it was supposed to, so I felt bad about my face. I didn't want to show it, so I covered it up with like as much beard as I could get away with without it like looking bad or itching too much. And I would go months without actually looking in the mirror because I hated my face. And when I started playing around with being genderqueer, I started shaving a lot more regularly and kind of taking care of my skin and learning a little bit about how to do makeup. And and I realized that I actually really liked my face. I liked the way I looked, but I liked it because it didn't look masculine. And before I'd always hated it because it didn't look masculine. And it was more around the fact that like I just couldn't fit the thing I was supposed to fit. I kept trying to pound this round peg into a square hole and it just wouldn't go in. The peg's bigger, the round peg's bigger than the square hole. I know it would go in if it was smaller. It's a big round peg. Doesn't fit in the square hole at all. And and it had been really frustrating and caused me a lot of problems. And then finally, I started to like, realize that the hole was the wrong shape and the wrong size, and the rod was the wrong depth. I mean, yes, these are all very phallic. I'm sorry about that. Especially for me, I have no desire to have phallic things in my life at all. Um, and and so a friend of mine said to me, one of my new friends from the community, um, she said, you're not really going to understand if you want to identify female until you really do it, until you go out in public and you just be a girl, um, and see how it fits, see how people treat you. Because a lot of gender, and there's two parts of gender. There's your gender expression, which can be anything. You can be a dude wearing girls' clothing, like a drag queen, and your gender is male. You identify as male. I don't really like the word identify for a variety of reasons, but I think it works in this case. You believe that you are male. You are confident that your gender is male, but you still might be a drag queen. And so in those cases, your gender expression is very female. And as I think there's a sexual orientation, you can be a straight male and be a drag queen. You can be a gay male and be a drag queen. Either of those work. And ironically, you can be a trans woman and be a drag queen, but that's an entirely different thing. But what I'm getting at is that your expression, how you present, how you look, the kinds of clothes you wear, the way you do all of those things, which can also alter your perception in society. or by society and how you're perceived and your placement in society. That's all your gender expression. Your gender is more wrapped around who you are inside. And another time I'll get into the actual science behind all of this because despite what the naysayers say, there are male and female brains, which is to say there are brains that are more male and more female, and they're all male and female in different ways. It's like a mosaic. Virtually no one, I believe, I don't know if anyone has ever been found to actually have only male attributes in their brains. Anyone else has ever been found only to have female attributes in their brains. It's a spectrum, it's two bell curves that overlap, which I guess means somebody must be almost entirely male out there, out of this many humans. But so another time I'll talk about that. But the the result of it is that inside you feel like you were a particular gender. And for me, what it really always boiled down to was that I wanted to be one of the girls. Um, and that was the thing that I found after going out and presenting as female, that women looked at me differently. Women treated me differently. And the big difference was that I was in the club in a different way. Like I'd always had a lot of female friends. My female to male friend ratio was like 100 to 1 practically. And I have a lot of friends. If I'm on a deadline, I could be chatting with like 70 to 100 people a week, and fairly in-depth conversations with them. Um, I'm like a chatty Cathy, and I'm always having conversation. I can carry on like 3 or 4 online conversations at once. I'm a pretty fast typist. Um, I'm sure there's some sort of terrible joke that can be made there too. But anyway, um, what I learned was that while I want my gender expression to be very female, and I feel the most comfortable with a very female gender expression, my gender itself is also female. And when I got welcomed to the sisterhood, I finally felt like I belonged, and I loved the way that women treated me. And the interesting thing is that before I admitted I was trans, I had a lot of very male tendencies because I was, some of them because I was trying to convince myself that I was male, and some of them because I was repressing a lot. Um, some of it like just sort of very overt, testosterone-based attraction to women, fixation on women and stuff like that. But I was always a little bit different. Like when I, watched porn or anything like that, I didn't want to have sex with the women. I wanted to be the women, um, which was very different. And it took me a while to realize that. Like when I played any video game, I was a girl. I never played a guy. I couldn't identify with being one of the guys. I identified with being one of the girls. Um, and if I came across games that wouldn't let me play as a girl, chances are I wouldn't play them. Um, I played Minecraft. Was the very first thing I do was switch from Steve to Alex. You know, what I came to realize was that even more than just wanting to be a girl, I wanted to be one of the girls. And the biggest reward for me in transitioning is being just one of the girls. And the way that women treat each other is very different from the way that women treat men, um, for reasons that could take up a dozen videos, and that I've got sort of experienced both sides of. And that really for me was the thing that solidified for me that I was trans, was that realization that I practically craved being part of the sisterhood, and the acceptance and the type of friendship that women have with each other was so important to me, along with the gender expression, um, along with getting to be a woman in society, and to move amongst other humans as a woman. All of that together was just like this undeniable thing. And that's sort of when it hit me, and this happens for a lot of trans women, that well, the gender dysphoria that had always been, for me, an amorphous sort of like dissatisfaction with my body in the way it looked, never feeling like it looked good, um, wishing I could wear clothes. Like I would constantly like spend hours in front of the mirror trying to find poses and ways to stand where my hips would be wider. Not hours all at once, but maybe like hours a week cumulatively. Um, and I would buy like pads and stuff like that. Most of them were terrible. They're foam monstrosities. Um, but I did all of that, and when I finally put all the pieces together and said this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, they all mean that I'm trans. It's like a switch went off in my head. And up until this point, I had existed with so much shame and so much guilt A lot of that was due to the religion stuff. A lot of it's due to society. All of that evaporated. It was instantly gone. Now, it did resurface periodically in waves as I dealt with the ramifications of changing your gender the way I have in the public perception of it. Um, but but yeah, it was very life changing, and it was only because I had these different labels. I had these different groups. The alphabet people, as some people derogatorily call them. I surfed the alphabet, and I said, like, which one of these things works for me? It was like reverse horoscope, like, which one of these signs best applies to me. Um, and I tried all of the ones that, except for the one that really, really was until the very end. And there I was. I was trans, and realizing I was trans was was a life-changing and life-saving thing for me. Because once I started to realize that I could never be, that it wasn't a cis male, um, I knew I could never be that again. It was just not an option. The thought of of basically giving up this path of discovery that I'd been on and just slotting myself into that square hole filled with cargo pants and boat shoes and shit like that. You know, it was like I would it'd be no, just no. There's no way. That's just the opposite of me in so many ways. Um, and yes, there are. That's not to say that like every cis male presents as like a cargo short wearing polo shirted guy in boat shoes. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, if you're, my belief is you should express yourself in whatever makes you feel good, and if that makes you feel good, then you should just wear that all the time. It makes your freaking uniform. But for me, it was just so not me that I couldn't fit into it. And yes, I could be a super queer guy, dressing like a drag queen all the time or some sort of flamboyant pimp daddy, but it also wasn't me because I did actually try that and it was fun, it was interesting, but it also wasn't me. And it wasn't me in the same way that wearing cargo shorts isn't me. Um, and as it turns out, like this is me. I like dressing like a girl, being girly, in my gender expression, and and I love cat suits like more than any other type of clothing out there, more than anyone should love cat suits. I'm sure it's probably tied to some sort of tactile thing to do with my ASD, but um, yeah, it was those labels, the fact that I could like try these things out and see which one fit, that basically ruled out all the other options until I realized I was trans. And then once I was trans, well, there are so many options there too. Like, are you binary trans? Are you non-binary trans? Are you femme? Um, and and for me, I'm like all the way over on like the femme side of the binary. I mean, there's a spectrum there too. Are you like a sexy femme? Or are you like a super cute, like, sundresses femme? I'm a little bit closer to more the sexy femme. Like, I love wearing cat suits, and heels and stuff like that. It's just my jam. Because to me, and it's entirely possible that I'm just like cramming 30 years of repression into like a short period of time, and I might ease up at a certain point and decide I love jeans again. That's totally cool. I'm not pigeonholing myself into any particular thing for the rest of my life. Um, but yeah, it was really those labels that saved me. And then once I figured I was trans, it was figuring out like what kind of trans I am, and discovering, yes, there are other people on this same journey with me. And sometimes when I'm struggling with certain things, I can reach out to them, and they can help me. And I wouldn't have found them if I didn't know the labels. And because the labels tell us where to congregate. They say, like, if you identify with these labels, and if these labels identify you, then here's your tribe. Go hang with them. And when you go hang with your tribe, you find, like, hey, these people have the same problems, and I've conquered this thing, and I can help this person, and they've conquered this thing, and they can help me. And that's really useful. And this is not a new thing, really, for people. We've done this all along. We find like people and we congregate with them, and they build us up, and we build them up. And that's what these labels do. That's what the LGBTQIA rest of the alphabet. It might as well be the rest of the alphabet. And I say that in a non-derogatory way because I believe that if you don't fit, and if you feel like you don't fit with an existing group of people, then you should try and find your group of people, find your tribe, find people that have the same struggles and issues that you can relate to, and they can relate to you. There's there's well, I believe very strongly in building bridges to everybody and learning how to relate to everybody and understanding how people became the way they are, what their struggles have been, and whatnot. Sometimes it's nice not to have to do that. Sometimes you just want to say, okay, I'm with my crowd. They get me. I get them. We can just be chill. So I'm going to kind of cut it off there. That's just sort of my thought on why labels are important and what labels did for me, using them as road signs to find where I needed to go. Um, and I know some people dislike labels and they dislike learning new things, but you talk to anybody who's deep inside of any industry or something like that, and you're going to see so many acronyms and labels that makes your head spin. And they're not useful in many cases for speaking to people outside of that group, but inside that group, you couldn't even communicate without them. Like when I was in software development, you just it would just be acronym soup flying through the air, and to an outsider, it just sounded like we were talking Greek the whole time. But for us, we understood exactly what we were saying, and if we didn't have those labels, it would have been arduous to try and explain and drill down to like a variety of concepts all the time. And and um, and the labels helped us, and the acronyms helped us, and the special words and our special language helped us. And every group has that, and and the LGBT group has all sorts of labels for all sorts of things, and we don't force them on everybody to know them all the time. But if you do sort of want to interact with us and our lingo, like I don't know all the non-binary stuff because I'm not non-binary, and while I understand where they are, and I know what a lot of their labels mean in general, I don't know a lot of the nuance, and and luckily I know some people who are good enough to share that with me, and I can also use my friend Google and learn some of that too. But but they don't expect me to know all the nuances of what they do, just like I don't expect them to know all the nuances of what it's like to be a binary trans woman. Our worlds are different, and we don't need to like know all the nitty gritty of our groups, separate groups, internal communications, but we do need to at least respect it and understand that it's useful and it's necessary, and there's nothing wrong with it, and we don't need to be scared of new things. New things can be pretty awesome. I'm here and I'm so much happier today because of new things. So hopefully you'll join me on this journey where I talk about things like this, other issues that are on my mind. Some of them trans, some of them not. Some about writing books. You never know. You might learn some neat things about that. And we'll see where it goes. Thanks for hanging out with me. Bye bye.